Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name is Isaiah Presley Lafone, and this is another episode of Speaker's Corner. And today I am so pleased to have on Protestant Paladin. You might know him from X. If you don't know him from X, formerly Twitter, make sure to click on the link in the description to check him out. He's got some fantastic, great content. I highly recommend his stuff. So today we're going to be talking about how liberalism invaded the church. So, Paladin, I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit. And how are you doing today, man?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I would say that as regards this whole Reconquista business, I think that this is certainly the right way to go about making this change happen in the main lines. I think the main lines need to change, and the changes that I foresee coming for the main lines are either total annihilation, which is the bad ending, and restoration, which is the good ending. And I think I think that deep down, we all know that the best way forward is restoration of the main lines. I don't think any of us want the main lines to actually die. And it doesn't actually seem very necessary for the main lines to die. So when we're going to address the problems of the main lines, we can't just black pill and say, oh, it's all over, the main lines are cooked, there's nothing we can do about it. We can't have that mentality. We have to have the mentality of, let's strive toward improvement, let's strive toward resurrection, which is really one of the main parts of Christianity. It's a religion all about resurrection, all about redemption, all about forsaking the old man and bringing in the new man. So when it comes to the main lines, I think we have to see the main lines as sort of a child who needs to repent. You know, the image of the lamb lost in the wilderness, and the lamb lost in the wilderness needs the shepherd to come and rescue it. We can't abandon the lamb. We have to go rescue it.
Right. Most certainly. And so you didn't grow up, in a mainline church, did you?
No, I did not. I grew up mainly non-denominational, and when the pandemic came around, this is sort of a personal story, but when the pandemic came around, we couldn't go to church, and I started having serious doubts about my faith. I don't think I would have ever called myself an atheist, but for a period of time, like, it was really unclear as to whether I was a Christian at all.
Right.
But after the pandemic, I converted and I came around again.
Right. That's awesome. Awesome story of God's grace and God's redemption. That's amazing. And so I'm so pleased to have you on today, brother. Love this topic. Of course, there's a good number of videos on my channel dedicated to this topic. Obviously, I am part of the Reconquista movement to retake the mainline churches from liberalism. So this is a issue that's very near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to your heart as well. I want to remind people, remember, we are not doing this because we hate the people, the liberal people who have taken over the denomination. We do not hate anyone. We love the church, and we love these people, and we would love to see their repentance and the return of the main lines into Christian orthodoxy where it belongs. So first question for you. We hear the terms thrown around a lot of liberalism and fundamentalism. What are liberalism and fundamentalism?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. If we're going to take the main lines back from liberalism, it's important to know what we're taking it back from. So what is liberalism? Well, liberalism comes around when you have the idea that the doctrines of the church can change, and not only can they change, but the previous doctrines, the very roots of the faith, can be cut off and cast away. I like to think of the growth of doctrine like the growth of a tree. You have the roots, which you can never get rid of. You can never change that. You can't get rid of that.
Right.
And then you have the tree that grows into its branches, and the branches from that grow from the roots up, and they grow into different places. Sometimes you have doctrines that that come about later in time. That doesn't necessarily mean they're false, but it does show that our understanding is growing. Our understanding is improving. I don't think that growing or changing in your understanding is bad. As a matter of fact, it's probably the best way we can do it, because it makes faith that much more reasonable. It makes faith that much more tangible. You know, it's not some like abstract thing that, oh, you must absolutely like have this and it cannot ever change. But faith can it can evolve, it can adapt. And when it comes to liberalism, it would be the kind of thing that would cut off the roots, cut off the main doctrines. So things like the Trinity, the resurrection, the existence of miracles themselves. These things would be sort of on the chopping block for a liberal theologian. They're like, oh, we don't need this to have proper Christianity. But you precisely do need that. That's what Christianity is, in fact, built upon. If you get rid of that, then all the other doctrines that you have then fall away. You cannot have Christianity without Christ. That seems self-evident, but not many people understand that. If you have the wrong idea of what Christ is, or what God is, or who God is, then you're going to have a wrong understanding of the faith in general, and the doctrines of the church become sort of arbitrary. You can just decide whatever you believe. And historically, liberalism has led the church to believe whatever the current culture teaches. So if you go back to the 1940s, the German churches were entrapped in liberalism. And because they were liberal, they didn't believe in things like the deity of Christ, things like the resurrection, things like the virgin birth. And because of that, they're going to have to unite around something. A religion is all about the unity of people around a specific creed. But if your creed doesn't include Christ and his work and his deity, then it's going to have to hinge around something else. And liberalism generally makes that about the culture. So in the 1940s, as I said, in Germany, they went towards what the culture was preaching. And the preaching of the culture in Germany in the 1940s was Nazism. And the liberals in the 1940s were generally pro-Nazi. Now, I'm not saying the liberals today are pro-Nazi. The liberals today still follow what the culture preaches. It's that the culture preaches something different now. Now it preaches a sort of libertarian freedom for all, and a sort of acceptance of everyone no matter what, and a sort of, especially considering things like gender identity and homosexuality. Liberals nowadays in the church are seemingly all about gender roles and all about the acceptance of homosexuals into the church, and a general vagueness about love your neighbor without any of the actual doctrines that come from the Christian tradition. Now, as regards fundamentalism is the exact opposite of liberalism. So it's not that, oh, you cut off the roots that keep your tree grounded, but we only have the roots of the tree. You have sort of like a tree that doesn't grow, it doesn't move. You just hold to the bare fundamentals. And fundamentalists often have a list of fundamentals. There are 5 generally that all of them agree on. You have the Trinity, the virgin birth of Christ, and You have his sinless life and the penal substitutionary atonement. Then fourth, you have the resurrection. And then fifth, I think it's the miracles, that miracles were performed by Christ. And the fundamentalists, the way they understand the doctrines of the faith, they do heavily emphasize these core doctrines, and I applaud them for that. That's good. But what's bad is they make the faith all about these doctrines, and they seem to inhibit the growth of our understanding. They seem to just have these bare list of fundamentals, and sometimes fundamentalists don't even agree on what the fundamentals are. Some might hold that, for example, exclusive credo baptism would be a fundamental of the faith. Or another might hold that, for example, memorialism would be a fundamental of the faith. And when our understanding is based on just the core and not the things surrounding the core, or just the roots and not the branches that come from the roots, then we have the problem of my religion is static. My faith is static. My understanding is static. This is akin to the parable of the talents, where the slothful servant buries his talent in the sand and doesn't profit off of it like his master wanted him to. And then the master comes and sees that he has the same thing that he left him with. And he's like, "You wicked and slothful servant, why didn't you send it to the market so that I can gain my talent back with interest?" And this fundamentalism, when it's all about just the core doctrines and not growing off from that, it just becomes burying your talent in the sand. And when you bury your talent in the sand, as regards doctrine, your understanding won't change, and you're always just going to have the same bare list. It's going to be a cold set of facts rather than a cohesive faith. And fundamentalism often disdains sort of development of our understanding of the faith. And I think that's also bad, because again, we need to grow in our understanding, but we also cannot get rid of the core. We have to branch out into new places in our understanding. We have to grow in our understanding, but we can't abandon our roots.
Yeah, Mr. Do you think that's why fundamentalists are so often so anti-intellectual, anti-theology, almost in some ways? In some ways, I guess academic theology.
I suppose so, because if you see the doctrines of the faith as an unchanging list of cold, hard facts, as is often the case with fundamentalism, then your view of science and of philosophy and of natural theology, it all deteriorates. It all goes away. It's like, okay, now what we have is we hold to these doctrines and we don't change our understanding. And that's just antithetical to things like science. And I think this is where liberalism got its foothold, because it sort of profited off the fact that fundamentalism ended up being sort of anti-scientific and sort of not caring about growing in their understanding. And they're like, aha, you see, fundamentalists are all about not changing what you believe. It's not learning. It's not science. You should be a liberal, and then you should grow in your understanding by cutting off these roots that you have. And you should therefore be a liberal because it's more scientific that way. We're willing to cut off the roots in order to grow in our understanding. But real science doesn't work that way for the liberal either. Because when we study science, we don't just study what scientists say now. We study what scientists have always said and how the understanding has grown from the starting point to the current point. So you can't cut off the roots even in science. So in the end, neither liberalism nor fundamentalism are scientific.
Right. Right. So where did liberalism and fundamentalism come from? Like, what's the originating point for both of those ideologies?
I would say that liberalism would, again, come from this sort of grasping onto science as central for understanding in general. So it would be like a sort of secularism where our understanding is scientific reason. And this is a sort of skepticism as well. So I would say that liberalism, especially with Schleiermacher, is about trying to make faith sort of like this pseudoscientific view that I've just presented, where you cut off the roots in order to grow in your understanding. And cutting off the roots isn't going to grow your understanding. It's going to shrink it, and it's going to demean it. So liberalism, I think, would come from this desire for the faith and for the doctrines of the church to be more like science, but it does so in a poor way. And fundamentalism would be the reaction to liberalism. It's like, oh no, you can't cut away the roots, so I'm just going to hold to the roots and not worry about the branches.
Buck everything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, most certainly. So eventually liberalism does invade the American church. It starts with Schleiermacher in Germany. And originally, the way I kind of see it, the way I kind of put it, is that originally it's like a man, testing the limits, seeing what he can get away with the law. So I think there's the same thing with liberalism. Schleiermacher and the early liberals are kind of pushing and pressing at little things, seeing what they can get away with, seeing what they can get away with in Orthodox in Christian circles. Now, eventually, we begin pushing harder, and liberalism gets into the institutions. They always attack the established institutions first because liberalism can't create anything; it only destroys. So liberalism invades Princeton Theological Seminary around the early 1900s. So there's a man who stands against this influx of liberalism, kind of personified in the man of Harry Emerson Fosdick, but there's this resistance in J. Gresham Machen, who was a professor there at Princeton, New Testament professor. And I wanted to ask you, how did Machen respond to the liberalism, and short-term and long-term? How did he respond?
Well, Machen, initially, when he was faced with liberalism in Princeton Seminary, his first reaction was sort of like, okay, I'm going to try to combat it, which is noble. I will applaud that. It's good to combat the liberalism because, as he rightly saw, it was essentially a different religion. Because once you cut off the roots, your tree is going to be uprooted and you need to plant a new one. And that's what liberalism always does. It uproots Christianity and plants its own different tree. So Machen saw this and he was like, okay, I need to combat this. So he tries all these different strategies to like stop the liberal influence in Princeton, but those don't seem to work. And as we all know, eventually he tries to make his own missions board, and that doesn't work, and he gets defrocked. And so after that, he's like, you know what? I'm going to give up on trying to stop the influence of the liberals in Princeton. It's basically dead anyway. We don't need Princeton, and it's just a sort of discarding. So whereas the liberals discard their doctrine in order to gain the institutions, what Machen did was the exact opposite. He discarded the institutions to gain his doctrine. So when we look at what Machen did, his initial response was to fight, which is good. And then he saw that it wasn't working for him. So he went away and he established the OPC and he started Westminster Seminary. And that didn't do anything for the mainline. In fact, it just took more conservatives and fundamentalists away from the main line. so that the liberals would have an easier time getting to a majority.
Right. Right.
Now,
Right.
Mation's response for the short term may have worked if he had continued it into the long term. But his long term response ended up being just split away and start a new institution. But that doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It's been about 100 years and it's not working.
Right. 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 Most certainly. Most certainly. So the question that I'll get into was, it's a very simple question. What could have Machen done better? Why did he fail so horribly?
So I think what Mason could have done better would be he could have not given up. Essentially, is what the Reconquista movement is saying Mason should have done. He shouldn't have given up. He should have kept fighting. If he had kept fighting, he could have won. But if you run away,
certainly.
You're not going to win. No one wins a war by running away. You can't win a war by turning around and running from the enemy. You can only lose wars by retreating. You can't win wars by retreating. So what he could have done better was continuing the fight in Princeton Seminary without running away, without leaving, without splitting off. It wasn't necessary for him to do that. Now, the common response is, oh, but he was defrocked. That doesn't mean he doesn't have influence anymore. Like, just because he was defrocked doesn't mean that he had to completely leave mainline Protestantism altogether and encourage others to do so as well. He could have simply gone to the RCA, which wasn't as liberal at the time. He could have gone to the Congregationalists. They weren't as liberal at the time. Or he could have gone to the Southern Presbyterian Church. He couldn't. Excuse me. He could have done that, but it seems that he thought his hand was forced when it really wasn't. He didn't at all have to split because there were so many other options than just starting your own institution. And starting an institution takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, all of which we don't have, essentially. Because the main lines are dying fast. And if we're just going to spend all our energy on building up these new institutions that we made to sort of replace the main lines, then it's going to take forever to get to where the main lines are. Where the main lines are is where things like the PCA, the OPC will be in like another 200 years. We don't have that time. We need to work with what we've been given by our forefathers, and we need to build upon that. We can't just break off and start anew, because that gets us into the mentality, well, I already broke off from the main line. What's breaking off from a break off? It gets you into the idea that it's okay to break off when really it is not. So what we can do now, I would say, is we should divert our energy back into the main lines so that we can continue the fight that Machen left off, essentially, because he sort of dropped his weapons and went the other way. We have to continue in the front lines where he gave up and ran away. That's the response I would urge people towards. It's the right response. It's the good response. It's even the logical response. If you see something like a culture war, which people often talk about, if you see it as a culture war, then why are you retreating? How are you going to win a war by running away? It doesn't make sense.
Right. And lest anyone think this is impossible, remember that the Southern Baptist Convention did this. 25 years ago was the 2000 Baptist Faith and Message codified, and the capstone of the conservative resurgence within the Southern Baptist Convention. A lot of people in the retreatist spinoff, or not spinoff, but uh, 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 split off, not spinoff, but split off denominations will say that, well, the Peace USA, the UCC, the Episcopal Church, the UMC, all these denominations, they're apostate. I'd like to remind them that they would have called the SBC an apostate denomination back in the 1970s and 80s when the conservative resurgence was really starting to gain steam. And it just goes to show you how quickly things have changed. No one today would ever think of calling the SBC an apostate denomination. It's one of the most conservative denominations within the United States, maybe the most conservative and orthodox in terms of its theology. Probably in the world. Yes. Their flagship seminary, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, is the largest seminary in the world. Why? Because of conservative orthodox theology. So we see that this conservatism and this orthodox theology does revive denominations, and you can reconquista a denomination which had fallen to liberalism. And I think that's what we must do. So I want to go ahead and bring up this chart. And this chart is just kind of showing you the spectrum of church thought. Would you like to expound on it, Paladin?
Okay, so let's begin all the way to the right with the fundamentalists. So when you have the fundamentalists, again, you have this idea of the doctrines of the faith are this cold list that never changes of cold hard facts. So you put people like Steven Anderson and Ken Ham all the way to the right,
right?
Because I think we would agree that if your list of fundamentals has more fundamentals, you are more fundamentalist.
Right.
So if you put things as non-negotiable, for example, for Ken Ham and Ray Comfort, they see a literal 6-day creation and a rejection of theistic evolution as essential for the faith. And things like young earth and those things, if they see those as essential for the faith and have those in their list of fundamentals, then they would be more fundamentalist than a guy who thinks that you can hold to an old earth and still rightly be called Christian. So we see that the more fundamentals you have, the more fundamentalist you are. And we have you put there Matthew Everhard. Would you care to expand on that?
No further comment.
Okay. But yeah, you put Mason right under Old Princeton. I think that's fair, because Mason was trying to, how do you explain this? He was trying to not only revive Old Princeton, but make Old Princeton great again. He wanted to make Old Princeton
awesome. We're going to put that on a hat.
Yeah. So he wanted to bring back not only Old Princeton, but also improve Old Princeton. So I think you're right to put him there. And then you have this neat little label called Molarism. Now, I've never heard of Molarism before. Would you care to tell me what that means?
Yeah, so it's a term that I invented. It's about a halfway point between fundamentalism and neo-orthodox theology. Molarism, of course, is named after Dr. R. Albert Mohler Jr., St. Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the original reconquistadors. He reconquisted Southern Seminary from the liberalism. See, the problem they were facing within the Southern Baptist Convention was, while the convention was going more conservative, we're having conservative presidents like Adrian Rogers and Charles Stanley. Our seminaries, our institution, specifically our flagship institution, that being Southern Seminary, is still quite liberal. They're still quite liberal. So Albert Mohler is elected as president of the school to reverse the liberal drift. He does. Mohler is about a halfway point between fundamentalists and neo-orthodox because he retains the academic intellectualism and intellectual honesty and intellectual rigor. That's why Southern Seminary, although being a conservative institution, very much theologically orthodox, is still well respected in the theological community because it's mainline, it's old, and because they are so academically rigorous. This isn't a fundamentalist Bible college like they predicted Moeller would make it into be. No, this is a very highly esteemed, highly rigorous academic institution where, unlike a lot of fundamentalist Bible colleges, sorry, I'm stumbling on my words a little bit there, but unlike a lot of fundamentalist Bible colleges, you're not being told what to think, you're being told how to think. Or as Albert Mohler so wonderfully puts it, thinking about thinking. So Albert Mohler is still an intellectual. He holds to the fundamentals of the faith. He's still very much theologically orthodox, but he's also very intellectual. He engages with the academics of his time, and he's certainly the greatest Baptist theologian of this current period in time. So I labeled that Mohlerism because I think he just kind of is the embodiment of that kind of middle way between neo-orthodoxy and fundamentalism. So, and then and I think this is the realm I would fall into. I'd be a little bit to the left of Mohler, as you can see on this chart. If you look at it, I'm a little bit to the left of Albert Mohler, and but I think this is the zone where we kind of want to be, or in the relative zone that we want to be between here and neo-orthodox.
Well, yeah. And you also put Mercersburg theology there.
Yes.
That's a very interesting topic, the Mercersburg route. And I think there are certainly parallels between Mercersburg theology and neo-Orthodox theology, especially like the Bardian form of neo-Orthodoxy, because of the emphasis on Christ as really the center of the religion, Christ himself, the incarnation. Mercersburg theology is very incarnational, and so is Karl Barth's neo-Orthodoxy. And you put Nevin right under Mercersburg, which, again, really fits because Nevin is sort of like the poster boy of Mercersburg, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
Now you put several reconquistadors under the neo-Orthodox and Mercersburg thing. Would you care to explain to us why you're putting like the different schools of thought on the thing themselves? Is it like the people under them are in that school of thought, or that the school of thought generally lies within this specific range on the spectrum?
Yeah, so it's twofold. One, of course, is that these people do lie within this theological tradition. And the second thing is also because this is where the theological tradition and theological thought, theological school is. So neo-Orthodox is kind of right smack in the middle between modernist, liberal, and fundamentalist. And you see Mercersburg is kind of the midway point a little bit, although it feeds into neo-Orthodox a little bit, between Mohlerism and neo-Orthodoxy. It's, further to the, I think Mercersburg is further to the left, into leaning into neo-Orthodoxy without being completely neo-Orthodox in every single way. So the reason I put those there is because I put these people under is because they do fall neatly underneath these categories. Like you said, John Williamson Nevin being right under Mercersburg, C.S. Lewis being under Mercersburg. I think C.S. Lewis is properly identified as a neo-Orthodox theologian, and a good one at that. So yeah, that's why I put those there. Yeah.
Would you say Lewis is a Mercersburg theologian? Out of curiosity.
I would say he is. I would say yes. I mean, clearly, obviously, I put him under Mercersburg. I would say he is in a sense, yes.
Okay. And then going further to the left, we have the Schleiermacherism, which, as you rightly put it, is like pushing the bounds, seeing what you can get away with, like experimenting with the law.
Right,
So,
right.
so this is sort of like starting to chop off the doctrines and eventually going on to chop off the roots themselves. So you put you put under that in parentheses the new Princeton, which is what Machen was fighting against. And yeah, Machen was fighting against Schleiermacherism, but by the time Machen came around, it had moved beyond just Schleiermacherism and had gone into starting to like reject the core doctrines like the Trinity, like the resurrection, and like miracles.
Right, right, so that's why you see Harry Emerson Fosdick quite a bit far to the left. If you'll look at the chart, that you'll see him quite far to the left of Friedrich Schleiermacher, because we've pushed the bounds. We've seen we can get away with quite a bit, and so now we're leaning over this way. It's the same thing with Dr. Crawford H. Choi, which is his. Let's see, Southern Seminary and Princeton Seminary are good examples of this liberalism, because one is Princeton being a good example of what conservatives shouldn't do, and one being Southern Seminary being an example of what conservatives should do. And Southern Seminary was founded by a bunch of Princeton graduates, which is why they're very similar, and they kind of go along the same route in terms of liberalism. So Crawford H. Choi is the Harry Emerson Fosdick of Southern Seminary. That's why you see them so close together. The difference there being Toy was thrown out of Southern Seminary, whereas Fosdick stayed, and Fosdick won. Now, the liberals would eventually win in Southern Seminary for quite a bit, but that's why you see Fosdick quite a distance away from Friedrich Schleiermacher, because we've pushed the boundaries. We've seen we could get away with quite a bit. So now we're pushing into getting rid of some of the core doctrines that really the liberals see as a weight holding down and holding the church back.
Right. And then we go all the way to the left and we find essentially heretics who don't believe the essentials of the faith anymore. They don't really believe Jesus is God. They don't believe the Trinity. They don't believe the resurrection. They don't believe any of the supernatural aspect of Christianity. And I would even say some would doubt as to whether Jesus was an historical person at all, which is a kind of crazy to be in the church and not think Jesus, the central figure of the church and the head of the church, is not a real person. That's a bit, that doesn't really make sense to me. At that point, why even call yourself a Christian if you don't believe in Christ at all?
Well, you got to remember, Paladin, this is all a metaphor for social justice, okay? So it doesn't really matter anymore. But you're right about this being like pretty much heretics. Jonathan Lee Walton, you'll see right there, not as far to the left, but pretty far to the left. He is the current president of Princeton Theological Seminary. He believes that black people should be interpreting Scripture and people of color should be interpreting Scripture differently than the white people, because I don't know, white people have read their race into the Bible for too long. It's pretty much what he would say. So he's a big proponent of CRT and interpreting the Bible through the lens of critical race theory and through the lens of your own ethnicity. Benjamin Perry is a man who Richard Ackerman had on, who is the one who infamously asks him the question of, what was the question? Have you ever been told that, part of you is sinful? And Richard responds with, I'm a Calvinist, dude. I'm a Christian. Every part of me is sinful, right? And then, of course, far to the left off the page is Brandon Robinson, who's been a big figure on TikTok, who's arguing that actually being gay is not a sin. I'm pretty sure he's in a gay relationship himself, and he's just way off the page. I'm pretty sure he would fall into the category you were just saying about Jesus mythicism, that this is just an analogy for social justice or something, and we have to get with the times.
Yeah, and I think that once it gets to that point where you don't have any really central doctrines about Christ at all, like not even that Christ exists, then you really just proved yourself to have destroyed Christianity itself. You can't have Christianity without Christ any more than you can have, for example, MAGA without Trump. MAGA without Trump would have no figurehead. It would have no poster child. It would have nothing centering it. If you don't have, if you have Christianity without Christ, you might as well have the cell without the nucleus. You have no DNA.
Hmm.
What makes you what you are? Nothing. What makes Christianity different than Islam or Judaism or Buddhism or any of the other world religions? Well, nothing, because now we don't have Christ. Now we don't have what makes us unique. We don't even have our namesake anymore. That's how terrible this is.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
now at the bottom of the screen, you put little labels for whether they would be Reconquista or anti-Reconquista,
Hmm.
and I think you're sort of going into the horseshoe theory on this one, because the ones in the
Hmm.
middle are pro-Reconquista, but on either end it's anti-Reconquista. So even
Right.
though the ultra fundamentalists and the ultra liberals can't really agree on anything, they can agree on one thing. It's that Reconquista is bad.
Reconquista is bad.
That's what they
Right.
agree on. I think
Hmm.
that might be why you put Matthew Everhard so far to the right, because he's recently gone a little off the rails on bashing the Reconquista movement, as we've seen him on Twitter, which is really sad.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be that way.
No, especially for an ordained minister of the Lord like himself. Yeah.
But let's not be judgmental. Uh,
Right. Of course.
Either way, and you put Richard Ackerman as right in the center, so RZ is
He's
just
run.
smack dab in the middle.
Hmm.
Would you say that RZ is actually like the centrist of centrists for church thought?
At the moment, at the moment, what his beliefs are at the moment, I would say yes, he is most certainly in the center, and that's why I think he's one of the. I think that's why he has such broad appeal. Maybe not from the fundamentalists of the fundamentalists, but he does have a quite broad appeal, um, and I think that's because he quite literally is the center, right? He's not too far to the right or too far to the left. It's funny because I think he's everyone that's in Reconquista is we're too liberal for the fundamentalists, and we're too conservative or too fundamentalist for the modernists, for the liberals. So I think this is the sweet spot that we're all kind of sitting in, but Richard Ackerman most certainly is the center.
Right. Okay. But yeah. Uh, Otherwise, would you care to explain some of the other names in here? Why you've put them there? Like, for example, David Wood and Inspiring Philosophy. Why would you put them here? They're not really
Well,
central on the question of fundamentalism and liberalism.
right. Well, there's still important church figures. Certainly in our modern day, moment, there's certainly important and influential people. Inspiring philosophy, that being Michael Jones. I think that inspiring philosophy is more an organization now than one person. Michael Jones is the person that I'm referring to here. He's still very influential apologist. This is just kind of showing the broad spectrum of church thought. And same with David Wood, still a great apologist and showing the wide spectrum of church thought and thought in the current day church. And then you've got people like Richard Burnett, who was just on Richard's channel yesterday, and he's going to be teaching uh, Redeem Zoomer and at seminary. So put him here. He's very much Neo Orthodox, such a cool guy. I was so grateful to be able to meet him and take a picture with him. He's a wonderful man, wonderful man. Karl Barth, you see there, he's leaning more towards the left there. I think Neo Orthodoxy, as it goes, drifts more and more to the right, except for one exception will be Jürgen Moltmann, who's right under Schlamacherism, who was not a Christian, was a blazing liberal heretic, but still gets considered Neo Orthodox from time to time. And then, uh, uh, let's see, we got B.B. Warfield over here on under Molarism. He leans further away from the fundamentalism. That's because he affirmed evolution. And so he's much more in the academic and intellectual, has much more academic and intellectual leanings. So those are a few of the names. I put the other Paul on there, Keith Foskey, a couple of our favorite people on there, just kind of placing them on the spectrum. That a bit of it is putting those people on there is a bit of an artistic choice, but I like to
Just for
see
fun,
where
right?
everybody's at. What'd you say?
Just for fun, right?
just for fun, man. But I do think it's interesting to kind of consider and think about where people are on the spectrum and in terms of church thought nowadays. Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned Warfield affirming evolution, but
Yes.
a lot of people forget that Warfield not only affirmed evolution, but he also coined biblical inerrancy itself.
Correct.
So either the ultra fundamentalists uh, have to say that Warfield didn't affirm evolution, which is very debatable. It's kind of a that statement. I've seen people on Puritan board make that statement, but
Mhm.
I don't see any hard proof that he didn't affirm it. I've seen several books talk about him affirming it, so I don't know.
Mhm.
But that sort of flies in their face. Like, hey, if
Correct.
he did affirm biblical inerrancy and he
Mhm.
did affirm evolution, then
Right.
wouldn't that mean that they're somehow compatible? And they sort of have to give an answer to that. The ultra fundamentalists, all the way on the right, like Ray Comfort and Ken Ham, as you've pointed them out as off the page.
Right. Right. And I think some of it would be some of the response would be specifically. I went to a conference a while back where their answer was, well, B.B. Warfield wasn't an evolutionist. They just kind of threw out all of his writings, all the evidence that he was an evolutionist, and kind of cherry pick certain quotes here and there to try to say, "Oh, he was not an evolutionist." So I think that's their really only card to play, because they can't say that B.B. Warfield was an evolutionist, because then the guy who coined the term, like you said, biblical inerrancy, is a evolutionist, and therefore they have to change their whole fundamental system, because one of their fundamentals would be you cannot be an
Affirm
evolutionist, be a
evolution,
theistic
yeah.
evolutionist. Right. So instead of that, we have to cope and twist words and cherry pick in order to try to say, no, he wasn't an evolutionist, right? Because this is the only card to play. But I think that's just so it's you're throwing out history in order to keep your fundamental today. Why not just admit the truth? Um, so that always kind of floored me. But it's anti historical, anti intellectual to try to make a statement that B.B. Warfield wasn't an evolutionist. But I've yeah, like you said, I've seen him try to do it. Yeah. Well,
Well,
I would like to. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go.
Okay. Uh, So my last question, as we wrap it up, I want to be respectful of your time and whatnot and stuff. So I would like to ask, what do we do now? The mainline churches are liberal. We have this Reconquista movement going. What do we do now? How does one help in this movement?
Well, what I would say is that the best way to help is by simply joining your local conservative mainline. I think you're going to have Zoomer's map in the description.
I
Uh,
will.
so the best thing to do is just join your local mainline and start actually making a difference. Start actually doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that people don't do much anymore. They don't really do stuff. They don't really go places. The
Mm-hmm.
world has gone sort of static after the pandemic. It's very depressing. It's very sad. But yeah, the what I would say is go to mainline churches to strengthen their conservative populations, and if you can't do that, then either spread the word, or you can donate. That also
Mm-hmm.
works. But ultimately, what we have to do is we have to spread the word that Christianity is neither unscientific nor rigid,
Mm-hmm.
nor is it completely just arbitrary.
Right.
There's stuff we believe. We have core beliefs, but we also branch out from that and learn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a way I think that Reconquista can be done even outside of the main lines, by just challenging the very idea of liberalism, where Christianity needs to get rid of its former doctrines in order to move forward and progress in society. That's if we can successfully challenge that notion, then liberalism itself will die without even needing a Reconquista. Now, Reconquista would still be essential, of course. If you don't have liberals in the church, then the conservatives would win by default, right? You just go there and huzzah, conservative now. If the liberalism dies off, that's like easiest crusade in a century. But
Right.
I think that the fight is really far from over. A lot of people think the fight for the main lines is over. There's nothing left to fight for. That's not true. That's not true. And of course, there are many faithful congregations that still hold the essentials of the faith within the main lines. Neo-Orthodoxy has sort of ensured that they don't go too far from the essentials. And I think that, yes, the way forward is Reconquista. The way forward is combating liberalism. It's not just moving away.
Right. Right. Most certainly. Most certainly. Well, man, I want to thank you for coming on today. It was a pleasure having you. I loved our conversation. Feel like we had a fantastic conversation. Guys, like I said, check out his X account. A link to that will be in the description. And please stay tuned to this channel. I have a lot of amazing news coming soon, and me and this brother will be doing another video on Sola Fide coming soon, and how Sola Fide is apostolic. So you will not want to miss that. So I thank you for being on, and I thank you all for watching, and God bless you all, and I will see you next week.
Bye.